Dzień dobry Państwu, witam serdecznie na
Good
kolejnym.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of our video conference, focusing on key problems of contemporary Europe and the future of the European Union. This time, we would like to talk about the economic recovery plan for the European Union, but it's not only from the point of view of economy. We would like to ask about the consequences of this plan for the political future of Europe. As usual, we will be joined by some renowned guests, specialists in the area, specialists not only within this issue. Our panelists include Dr. Justyna Schulz, head of the Western Institute economist. We did discuss the topic with her in the past. Piotr Arak, head of the Polish Economic Institute, an important analytics facility. Hans Olaf Henkel, journalist, author, manager, and member of the European Parliament in the previous term. Welcome. My colleague from the European Parliament from that term of office. We reminisce with nostalgia about that term of office. I feel sorry that he's not with us during this term of office. And Ilya Marianidze, representing the Embassy of Georgia at the Embassy of Austria. So this is going to be a sort of an outside look into the European Union. And we will also be joined by Paolo Borgia, who is the member of the European Parliament representing Italy from the Lega party. I hope that he will present the Italian or Southern European perspective when it comes to economy and the European economy, but also his view on the consequences of the European recovery plan. Like always, I would like to thank our sponsors. We are being sponsored today by Orlen and KGHM, two Polish companies. So we are very grateful for their support. We were expecting to see the representative of Orlen here today, but unfortunately for a variety of reasons, Mr. Szewczak unfortunately couldn't join us today for our discussion. So we will divide our meeting as usual into two parts. The first part of the panel is going to focus on the issues of economy. We have approximately 1 hour for that, and then we will switch to more political issues. Mr. Henkel agreed to take part in both. Afterwards, as usual, we'll have a chance to ask questions. The discussion will be conducted by Madam Wieczyńska from our association, because let me remind you that this cycle of video conferences has been organized by the Association of Artists for the Republic of Poland. The association was created back in 2010, and it brings together people who create ideas, art, film, all that in the service of the Republic of Poland, but at the same time, in the service of Europe, because the interest of Poland equals the interest of Europe, in my view, at least. These two coincide. So that would be it on my part. And now perhaps let's switch to, one more thing. You can listen to our event in English, in Italian, or in Polish. Paolo Borgia will join us a little bit later in the second part of the panel. So now perhaps let's start with the first section of our webinar. So the first panel, typically we assign 10 minutes for the first intervention to every panelist, then we summarize and then assign additional time to answer questions. Right, so as we know, in Poland as well, there is quite a lot of controversy going on as regards the European Recovery Plan and the consequences of that plan. It may even turn out that there might be a difficulty to gather parliamentary majority in order to pass that plan. So there are certain controversies focusing on the ruling coalition. We are sort of used to that for a while now in Poland. So I think it's good to have a conversation about that and try to clarify matters. So perhaps we will start with Justyna Schulz, Dr. Justyna Schulz. Perhaps you could bring us closer to the topic. Is that a new quality in European politics, that whole recovery plan, or is it perhaps, is it raising hopes when it comes to the goal of recovering economy? And could it be said that it's going to be Germany and the countries of the north that sort of conceded to the pressures of Southern Europe? So, Dr. Schulz, is it a new quality, and what can we expect from it, from the recovery plan when it comes to European economy? So over to you now, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you very much for having me here, for creating this opportunity to take part in the discussion among so many honorable guests. And I'm happy to speak to this very important topic because it will draw a path for the development of the European Union and its member states. Unfortunately, I will not be able to answer very clearly to this question, to give you a single answer, to tell you to what extent it is a new quality. Undoubtedly, the recovery plan does create for a European Commission an additional instrument that allows them to draft a direction of investments in member states. And these investments will focus in two areas, namely technologies, climate-friendly technologies, as well as digital transformation. So this might be interpreted in the following way. That instrument is creating, or rather, it brings member states closer with one another via the manner of financing, vouching together for the debt through which these investments are to be financed. But I think that another important factor evaluating the meaning of the fund is the fact that this fund has been created under extraordinary circumstances. The legal treaties refer to such paragraphs of the Lisbon Treaty that envisage the creation of additional extraordinary measures in order to prevent all sorts of disasters, catastrophes. And it seems that the situation we are in now, the situation that affects member states' economies, not equally, but it does, the losses that have been incurred are unprecedented. And so it is definitely justified to use that instrument, to activate the instrument that has been envisaged under European treaties. Importantly, that fund is planned to be temporary. There is a limit on its duration, and it is to be spent on specific steps in response to pandemic challenges. These challenges could not be foreseen, and they very strongly affected all European member states. So it could be seen as a sort of an opportunity for more flexible action under legal stipulations. And it's a proof of certain good condition of the EU that is able to react to this unprecedented challenge. So I do realize that there are certain tendencies for this fund, for that instrument to become a permanent fixture. But these are just tendencies that are out there. The legal situation that we have as of today tells us that it's an unprecedented situation, time limit on it. Now, is it just about the European North taking a step back from the European South? It is true that there was a very strong lobbying for the fund coming from the countries of the South. That's true, but we cannot forget that that fund is in a way a response to the needs that had been defined by the German Minister of Economy, Minister Altmaier, who, in collaboration with the French minister, Poland joined in as well, and Italy as well. And they spoke about the changes in the functioning of the common market and allowing for a greater support from member states when it comes to the functioning of enterprises, of companies. That fund opens this window, opens that opportunity. Member states are now given an instrument for the first time ever that has never been included in previously existing market regulations. So they can now actively engage and financially support companies and various private enterprises in selected areas that are found to be essential for the future development of the European Union. So, yes, countries of the North have agreed to co-finance and to support countries of the South in this respect, but at the same time, a country like Germany gained a possibility of acting more freely, more flexibly, to actively support their enterprises. Is it the right way to go? Is that the correct response to the challenges we're facing? That's a completely separate question. But in view of the ruling elite in Germany right now, this is what Germany fought for, even before COVID pandemic happened. So we might say that this is a win-win situation, both for those who wanted some support, specific financial support, like the countries of the South, but also for those who wanted some more leniency when it comes to the rules of the functioning of the common European market. And that would be true of Germany. Now, the question about the change in the philosophy of the functioning of the European Union. Here, I would like to emphasize, or rather, I wouldn't go as far as saying that there is a change. But what we see now is a certain change of philosophy regarding the collaboration between business and politics. In the past, when the treaties were drafted, the idea was to completely separate these two spheres. Now, the popular approach is the idea of an entrepreneurial state. On the other hand, after the financial crisis, the banking crisis, there developed a strong idea of responsible and inclusive capitalism, where companies, enterprises take co-responsibility for certain social issues, climate issues, and so on and so forth. So the public interest issues. So in a way, this is an element of a more general change in the understanding of the coexistence of business and public institutions. So to summarize, it is very difficult to say unequivocally, this instrument definitely contains a number of various options that are very positive in nature. There is also a number of threats, of risks in it. To make it more systematic, perhaps we could focus on those elements that, depending on the region, are different, that are formulated differently within the fund. For instance, countries of the South, on the one hand, they are satisfied, they are happy because they succeeded in initiating the initiative of that kind, and they were successful in finalizing it. Nonetheless, these countries also find that in a way they were owed these resources because of an unfavorable situation within the Eurozone and the losses that they incurred because of that. So there is a dominating conviction there that being part of the Eurozone brings losses to their economies. And so it's a sort of a compensation of these losses. This is how they view the funds coming from the recovery fund. Of course, if that diagnosis is in fact correct, then these resources are not going to repair structural discrepancies, and they are not the solution to the problem. Now, switching to the countries of the North, indeed, on the one hand, there is the positive element that I've already discussed, a certain hope that via this instrument, the discrepancy in competitiveness and technological divergence between Europe, China, the United States and Eastern Asia is going to be in a way, well, that we are going to catch up. But Scandinavia in particular may have concerns that engaging the potential of states that is not equal among member states is going to change competitive environment also within the internal EU market. So this is one of the reasons for concern. And that's been postulated by these countries. But also financial burden for the economies may be too harsh. The main burden is put on these countries specifically because the European Commission has a good rating only because several of the member states enjoy a very positive, very good, favorable rating. So so much can be lost here. Now, talking about Eastern Europe, very shortly referring to Poland. In Poland, in fact, we put a lot of hope into that fund. We hope for further modernization and energy transformation, as well as opening ourselves to new ways of manufacturing and new technologies. But the threat that I see here is a certain, well, resignation, giving up on developing our own financial instruments, and gradual addiction to EU funds. But of course, all these options that I'm listing, they do not have to happen. I think this is the process that remains open. It contains a lot of opportunities, but we also have to be aware of potential risks. So it can end unfavorably. Thank you very much. Like all decisions taken at the point of uncertainty, this one is difficult as well. But I would like to now to ask Mr. Hans Olaf Henkel, what is the perception from the point of view of economy? I'm interested in the perspective of German entrepreneurs, for instance. How do German entrepreneurs, businesses, companies, leading players in the German market, how do they view this plan? Do they see it as an opportunity, as a chance, or is it just a temporary instrument, or is it a threat? Is it a risk? Director Schulz was talking about, well, she referred to Mr. Altmaier's strategy and the tendency that it represents in the economy. But is it viewed positively in general by the representatives of the German economy or not? And what is your view? Over to you for 10 minutes.
Can you hear me? Yes,
you.
well, let me, first of all, Professor Krasnodębski, let me tell you that I'm glad to see you in good spirits, good health, and you have, you look younger every time I see you.
We
this,
all look young. Yes.
This confirms my prejudice that people in Brussels really enjoy a hell of a good time.
Yeah,
and,
it is recovery. Thanks to pandemic, I must not travel to so often to Brussels, and probably this is this.
Yeah, well,
I am more relaxed in this sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. By the way, I have not gotten any translation to what has been said so far. So,
so if you press in the here open the screen, that there is a possibility as to
I don't see it.
To make.
I only see.
There's 3 points. Yeah, if you press here, there's a mute, stop video, share participant, and there's here,
okay.
And if you press here, then there's a language interpretation, and
okay, good. I got this now.
You can put this Italian or English.
Good. Okay, I've taken English, and so unfortunately I couldn't really understand because what Dr. Schulz did say. However, I did catch some German names like Altmaier and things like this. So while she was supposed to answer the question number 1, or whether Germany and other northern countries yielded to pressure or not, I take the liberty to answer the question also very quickly. The answer is yes and no. Yes, because normally, of course, the northern countries like Sweden or Denmark or the Netherlands, and of course Germany, would never have agreed to such a program, which is basically based on allowing the European Commission to be a lender. Because so far the European contracts have deliberately forbidden this. And so I would say that it is quite obvious that not only the socialist or let me say the southern countries and the socialists, but in Germany, even the Christian Democrats have suddenly now switched position and have now yielded to this dramatic, in my view, dramatic change of financing, the way we can finance the European Union. And well, then I also must say that the socialists, or the Greens, and some other Europhiles always wanted the EU to have a European debt facility and so on. So let me also quite clearly say, if Britain would have stayed in the European Union, I don't think that the package would have ever seen the light of day in the way it has today. And in the discussions, we all noted, by the way, that the classical role of Britain and Germany was taken by Prime Minister Rutte in the Netherlands. He was the final, he sort of tried to change or avoid the worst. And his support was then secured by the Commission giving him even more money than originally allocated. And I think I can say the same thing for Poland, because classically I was always thinking that the current Polish government is more critical towards additional responsibility in Brussels, but it changed its mind also later because Frau von der Leyen decided to give them a little bit more money. So at the end, it was quite frankly, the German taxpayers, or let me say the children and the grandchildren of the German taxpayers, which will finance this bill. Now to the question you posed to me, will the pandemic strengthen Germany's economic position in Europe? No, the answer is very clearly, it will not strengthen it, it will weaken it. And I should say at the outset, by the way, all countries which are hit by the pandemic are weakened by the pandemic. So I can't think of any country which is benefiting from it. You can say the same thing even about China, because yes, China is developing quite well economically, but it has suffered last year as well. Now, of course, the question, as I know Professor Krasnodębski, is not such a simple question. He wants to know whether in relative terms, I think, whether in relative terms, Germany is benefiting from this. And my answer here is also very clearly no. And I will tell you why. Number one, and I give you, I think, one example, which I think is one of the most eloquent examples of how Brussels has failed. And that is the way they assumed responsibility for purchasing the vaccines on a centralized basis. Now, I don't know whether you're aware of the fact that before this decision was taken, Germany, with some few other countries, has already secured significant vaccine volumes for delivery into Germany when Mrs. Merkel decided that it would be a great sign of Europe and solidarity if Brussels and her friend Frau von der Leyen, the new president of the European Commission, would do this purchase deal. And Germany by itself abdicated the national responsibility of securing sufficient vaccines to Brussels. And I do remember very well, it was, I think, on the 27th of December last year when Frau von der Leyen celebrated the first vaccination of an elderly woman. And she used the term, this is a moving moment of European unity. But it has become very clear that Brussels has never purchased anything on behalf of the 27 other countries. And if it would have been of advantage to do so, it would have done that in the past. And in this particular case, it was done to demonstrate solidarity and unity. And of course, the byproduct of doing this is that you were able to demonstrate that all 27 countries started with vaccinations on the same day. Of course, they did it at the expense of the speed of all. In other words, I always say when you are running a marathon race and the runners agree in front of the race to arrive at the finishing line at the same time, this will not be a very fast race. And that's exactly what has happened. That's why Europe has fallen so much behind, for instance, Britain, Israel, or the United States. And of course, this has a tremendous economic effect because in relative terms, I now speak about the European Union in general, will recover much later than the United States or, for instance, Israel or Britain. And I think this is already a demonstration of how too much Europe can hurt the economic development in Europe. Now, I should also say that it is probably the biggest blow, also in my country, to the acceptance of Brussels. I have been a critic of too much Europe for many decades, but I have never seen so much criticism thrown against Brussels as in this particular example of failing to secure the sufficient vaccines. And this can have a longer lasting effect on the acceptance of Europe, certainly in my country. So, and it is not an incident that Mrs. Merkel, who in the beginning of the pandemic was celebrated to do a good job, and I think she did, by demonstrating a rather, I would say, a solid and good science-based policy. She was enjoying in the middle of last year fantastic ratings in the public, in the polls, more than she ever had before. And now today they are dropping considerably and dramatically, to such an extent that today, based on today's polls, you can anticipate that there is a chance that there will be a government next time based beyond the CDU and CSU, only based on socialist Greens and the leftists. So this is a byproduct of this decision or this failure of the European Commission, and quite frankly, it was instigated by the Berlin government in the first place. Now, let me also make a little criticism towards the title of this program. The program says reconstruction of European economy, and that's exactly the term Brussels use. Now, and they use very often examples like the Marshall Plan. Of course, Professor Krasnodębski knows what the Marshall Plan was. But quite frankly, we didn't need a Marshall Plan because of the pandemic, because there was nothing destroyed. Contrary to the disaster after the Second World War, we didn't face destroyed factories or bombed buildings or infrastructures totally in ruins. So the idea that we need money to reconstruct Europe economically was totally wrong. It had nothing to do with Corona. But the package, which was agreed upon by Brussels and unfortunately by all 27 heads of state and governments, was called a construction package. And if you look at what is in this package, then you see it has very little to do with reconstructing Europe. It has more something to do with climate change and digitalization, i.e. modernization of Europe and things like this. They may be all very necessary, but they have nothing to do with Corona. So my bottom line here is Germany will suffer, will pay, and finally, we are being misused, in my view, the voters in the European Union. We are being misused in supporting a package which is allegedly a requirement because of a big pandemic, but has nothing to do with it. So the pandemic, in my view, is being used to reshuffle the support within Europe from the north to south, and it does. It is being used to introduce the Eurobonds through the back door, and it does. It is being clear for me that we will now run into a fiscal union away from, at least in the European Union, in the Eurozone, from a fiscal union to a fiscal union from a currency union. And we will fund budget deficits of countries by Brussels. And finally, and I think this may be the long term, the worst result. There is now a system established this goes like this. If a country gets broke of the 27 countries, all other countries will guarantee that country. And I think this is deadly, because if all are responsible for everything, then finally nobody is responsible.
Okay, thank you very much for this very interesting points. I think it would be for Polish audience very interesting, because it's a new perspective, German perspective. And I now go to Mr. Arak. and we'll ask you about Polish perspective. Chciałbym pana zapytać, posłyszeliśmy, jakie jest stanowisko, punkt widzenia
I would like to ask you, because, well, we heard just about the position, the perspective of Germany. I think that in Poland, at least in the government, we attach great hopes with this fund. So how would you refer to what Mr. Hank said, his critical remarks? Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for extending an invitation to me. I also would like to thank you for the possibility to participate and also for the opinion of Hans-Olaf Henkel. And I will be trying to limit the critical comments I have, because from the Polish perspective, what we have to pay attention to is that we are the 5th largest beneficiary of that money. And well, as far as the non-reimbursable funds are concerned, and in the result of that, our perspective may be drastically different to what it might be if that sum was smaller. That is why the budget for the upcoming 7 years is 140 billion zlotys outside of the cohesion policy. That is why we have a totally different attitude, a totally different approach to the mechanics, and we are just thinking about that it is expanding the pool of the money that we can contribute to the convergence and the further strengthening of several sectors of our economy. That is why it is a perspective that we enjoy, and it will be different than the perspective of those who are critical about the solution in Western Europe. What is going to set us apart in terms of investment needs is the position on what we are supposed to spend money on, and this is connected with the biggest challenges faced by Poland, that is connected with energy transformation, and also the fact that a significant part of that money will have to be used for the purposes of energy transformation. 37%, 20% of that money will have to be spent on digitization in broad sense, both in terms of enterprises, but also in public sector or healthcare. Furthermore, we also have other areas which were not bombed and they were not destroyed, which is infrastructure, transport, innovation, healthcare system, which may have been hurt. And also the issues connected with territorial cohesion. Every time when I approach it, I look at the National Recovery Plan as an additional mechanism to the current and the subsequent perspective of spending of structural funds from the European Union, whose spending period is a little faster. We simply make an assumption that this money is going to play a function of a booster for the European economies, including Central Europe, at the end of 2021 and in 2022. Part of public investment with significant risk aversion of private sector could be executed, and that the delays in infrastructure that we still suffer from could be made up for and fueled with the additional streams of funds. And this is something which is going to actually put us apart from other Western European countries as to what this money is going to be spent on, because our point of view is totally different. I wonder what may be said about the proposed programs of economic recovery in Western European countries. I think that France, as well as Germany, I believe, are the countries that have already proposed their program. When we look at the results of the negotiations with the European Union, European Commission, and we'll see whether it's going to be a tool to make the French economy more modern and more competitive. But now let us focus on Poland. No question that as a country, we need an additional development stimulus. Money is what can be absorbed here very fast. Stagnation in mid-term in Western Europe is quite a big risk. That is why the overinflating of economic climate in Western Europe, even if it is slightly artificial, is very much needed from our point of view. But when we look at risks for Poland per se, Well, as the professor said, he mentioned problems connected with the possible ratification of this document. These risks are very much different than in Western Europe. For example, the absence of the National Recovery Plan can be a potential for Poland to lower rating for our country because we decided to reject some additional fund that could support the economic development. On the other hand, it also translates on the higher level of the cost of the servicing of Polish indebtedness, not to mention the community one, and it also is a blow to our creditworthiness. And it is also something that influences the investments here. And at the end of the day, it also leads to the greater instability of exchange rate of Polish zloty. So the risk of the absence of the approved KPO for Poland, the National Recovery Plan for Poland in midterm, can be greater than the very fact that we do not accept the additional money for investment, because it will act in several areas, several dimensions, and they will hit every enterprise which operates in Poland. What is quite important in the case of spendings is that we have several taxes which are introduced at the European level or at a quasi-European level due to what is foreseen there. It is mainly connected with the plastic tax, and it has to be introduced at the level of 2 or 3 euros, according to the proposal of the European Parliament. The rate that is adopted is 0.8 euros per kilogram. However, from the Polish point of view, it can generate a relatively low cost because it is only 840 million euros throughout the next 7 years, which is about 5% of the program cost implemented by Poland. That is why this the consequence is not really very grave in this framework. Well, I certainly open the discussion to how the additional taxes would be introduced by the European Union. And there is another thing which is more controversial. It's connected with the reform of the emissions trading system, European trading system, and the revenues will not allow for entering the common budget, but it also leads to the cost that is going to contribute to the increasing prices of energy in Poland if we do not go for transformation, to which we get money from the cohesion policy and the national recovery plan. But it is a big risk. At a time when the reforms are not implemented, does that go in the direction of the reduction of the emissions in the economy? Will incur the cost, and at the same time we will have a higher cost which is connected with prices, because the ETS will make our energy bills higher. And it applies to the end consumer as well as industry. So it is a double blade sword. This problem, however, is difficult to solve. In Poland, there is a very hot discussion about it. There is another thing which is connected with the community level of debt. People say that it is the Hamilton moment, and even Chancellor Merkel says that from the other side, we also have the community indebtedness, and this is just a moment, as in the case of Alexander Hamilton, and the approach to the indebtedness of the United States. We are not far from that point, I have to admit, and we can imagine that in the perspective of the next crisis, that in 7, 6, or 5 years will come in the European Union, there will be more mechanisms like that. Are they adverse in Poland, unfavorable? Well, when we do not have the single currency, and when we have lower interest on the loans with the risk of payback by individual or member states, most of the member states, I would say that it is a good solution, because the interest on bonds which will be issued in this program is negative. and the profitability of 10-year bonds is at the level of 1.35. So our debt is more expensive. It does not imply those additional consequences. The framework doesn't always work for us, and there is no traditional Brussels bureaucracy which is connected with the spending process, and the cost is scattered up to 2058, which is quite a distant date in connection with the debt, and it is really the right argument that it is going to be paid back by also German grandchildren. And it is going to be broken down to more and more years when we couple it with an additional crisis. It can be even more extensive. That is why in Poland, there are discussions amongst the economists. We are not that much attached to the use of reimbursable money. We are satisfied with the fact that we are a significant beneficiary of non-reimbursable funds, and this has the greatest impact on the economy. We do not have forecasts revised for Poland for this year, and we assess that the absence of the National Recovery Plan, the prospects for the spendings of the money in 2022, because it is not going to have a significant impact on the economy in 2021, and that is why Poland could negotiate quite harshly with Brussels last year. So that would mean GDP lower by about 4% at the end of 2024. And any delay in the introduction of the money would lead the GDP lower in every subsequent year because of the lower inflow of cash and the investments that will be implemented also in line with the multi-annual plans of the government, which are announced. Or in terms of development of offshore in the Baltic Sea, which would be co-funded from that, and many other undertakings the money will be used for. So from this perspective, it also means that we are going to have fewer jobs created, fewer additional jobs created that would be below 100,000. That is why, from the Polish perspective, it is only good for the economy. Any delays in its execution are negative. However, well, it is our perspective that every additional money shot is welcome here with a big smile and open arms. It doesn't mean that this money is that the most important element is reimbursable funds. It is important for us to have the process of contracting of investment of the projects which are now being discussed publicly started, and we simply think that the projects that are to be implemented by Western countries could really move them up to a higher level of economic advancement. Well, under the assumption that those investments are going to be relatively simple. We are an economy that is now reaching the borderline of being unable to generate economic growth by means of executing very simple investments, similar as the ones under the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. Certainly, Western Europe is not at this stage, and I hope that those funds will be used in order to accelerate the economic growth of southern countries, including France and our main economic trading partners, because without that, our country will also develop slower. It is quite a significant risk that the money will not be properly used. And finally, the last thing that I wanted to raise, and let me finish it in a moment, it is absolutely the last thing, that it is a question which also comes up amongst German economists, whether at the time of the third wave of the pandemic and what is also going to happen this year with the European economy, well, perhaps this money is too limited, and whether the simulation package that we may have in the south of Europe and in the European Union as such will be too low as compared with the United States, which is going to enjoy a faster economic growth and much greater fiscal package as compared with GDP than Europe, not to mention Asian economies. And this is also a risk that comes up in the horizon when we look at what is happening with lockdowns, restrictions, as well as the industry that can suffer from that. Thank you. Right, sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much. So when we are talking about different perspectives, one perspective very positive by Dr. Arak, slightly skeptical, but also positive by Dr. Justyna Schulz, and critical perspective presented by Hans-Lav Hlankel. And I think that it also results from what Mr. Arak was talking about, that well, the next generation of Germans will also have to pay back the debt. Well, undoubtedly, it is a burden for the German society. Otherwise, well, German society wouldn't have it. And now we have some time for the second round. We have about 25 up to 30 minutes to talk about it. So I would like to start again with Dr. Justyna Schulz and ask you that question. You raised a problem there, which I think Director Arak doesn't see. Well, this is the problem of the dependency, because you said that all the money is welcome, but there is no free lunch. There is no free lunch. This is how it is said in English. With this program, just as Mr. Henkel said, it is not really the recovery program. Well, there are some social aspects in it, but at the same time, it is connected with the problem of the economic reconstruction. 30% of those funds are to be spent on environment. But I would like to say that those objectives are not the objectives that we set for ourselves. The environmental objective, well, an objective is when it grows from the economic development, and it is an expression of the needs of the society, and it is different than when that objective or some other objective, the digitization, modernization, innovation. Well, I have a problem every day how we are to get involved if we do not use Horizon Europe. How can we get involved into that, to these programs? What Mr. Henkel said, an example of the vaccine, we are not even able to do that. We are now negotiating that we are going to produce something on the vaccines license, but we were not even able to participate effectively in the talks about the vaccines. That is why, from this point of view, we are quite, technologically delayed. So the question is whether this danger director takes us to the point when our innovation is weakened. We keep looking at some sort of support, that these projects, which are now under the recovery plan, will be simply embedded in the logic of the categories which are co-funded. But they will not necessarily have to express the right needs of the society. I remember when the observatories, like astronomical observatories, were built from the time of Donald Tusk, and they were absolutely unnecessary. Well, those new Copernicuses, but it's done because there was money to do that. Or the university base, and there was no money for personnel cost. So I have to keep in mind that the consequences do not necessarily have to be just as the expected, because the objectives that we are talking about, they do not grow from the needs of the economy of a given country.
Right, thank you for this question. Responding to it, I would like to refer partly to what other panelists said. I still think Mr. Henkel actually said that that's a different situation from the post-war period when infrastructure was damaged, destroyed, it needed renovation. I feel that in a certain sense, we are today in a phase, in a time when the digitization phase, and it's progressing whether we want it or not, but it's going to be progressing, as well as the pro-climate movement, which is very common, the awareness of that problem in the society and the expectations associated with pro-climate technologies. That awareness is very high in the society. So we are in a situation where large portions of the technology and infrastructure that we use to date is sort of losing its value. It's no longer useful. Our economies are being forced to exchange a whole number of technological solutions. So this is a sort of a turning point where we are all right now. And so we have an equal baseline, so to say. We are facing a similar challenge, everyone is. So in a sense of, in that sense, the economies that are sort of delayed in some ways, that need to catch up, still are facing a similar challenge. So the problem that's there, the problem that was in fact mentioned by Professor Krasnodębski, is the understanding of our position in this race for new technologies, for new solutions. Up until now, our modernizing meant that we were only consuming technologies that had been developed and tested in Western Europe. Now, if we want to perform some sort of a developmental jump and really use the resources that we receive from the fund, I think it would be good to define ourselves as an entity that co-creates these new processes, that participates in their development, that develops new technologies and new solutions, because, well, what I see is what is happening in the automotive industry. We don't have it, we don't own it, but you see that there is a lot of breakthroughs happening there. And I feel that Poland, under the circumstances, is not in an unfavorable position. To the contrary, all the PISA tests and research comparing pupils of different European countries, the studies show that the capability of working on technology is really high in Poland. The problem is that we used to be modernizing infrastructure in the sense of pavements and things like that. Now, what we have to do is take care of the capital that we have, the human capital that we have, that it can work here in our country, and to co-create the new solutions that are being sought after everywhere else in Europe, in all the member states. So I think it's an important moment in our history. We are now seeing many doors opening to us, and Professor Krasnodębski already mentioned that our potential is different than the German potential. To us, the EU level is important. We've always been trying to avoid direct dependencies in the concerto of empires, but I think maybe we should try and learn to use the European level more in order to fight for our interests. For instance, handling the vaccine issue. Perhaps this entire project is not going as it should, but in the first group that Mr. Henkel mentioned, the group of countries like France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, the countries that were trying to handle it on their own, what would be the situation of all the remaining countries if that had happened? So do we want to directly deal with Germany or France, or do we want to do it via the EU? The same would go for the assistance to Italy in March or April. Do we once again deal with the specific EU member states, or do we go via the EU? It was thought, it was considered to be a better option, that it increases stability and sort of, well, peace into the relationship between member states rather than direct negotiation. So there is much difficulty here. I mean, many threats mentioned by the professor, in fact, the interdependencies, the feeling that the EU resources are our only alternative, that without them, that without that money, we cannot develop. That is a threat. I agree that that way of thinking is dangerous. But on the other hand, sorry, that that money is also a chance to build to reinforce our institutions, to gain financial sovereignty or sovereignty in other areas, and to change the attitude to human capital, to take a step back from the model that is based on cheap labor. We have to start being more attractive to specialists who manufacture cognitively advanced products. Because without that, I fear that we might feel so dependent, you know, that we have better roads, but somebody else is building them and building our factories and making money to increase consumption elsewhere, abroad. So that would definitely be very dangerous, very bad if we decided to stay within this model. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now a question to Hans-Olaf Henkel, namely, well, it's a bit of a tricky question because you said that it does not lie within the interest of Germany. Well, you said that that was yielding to the countries of the South. You mentioned a dramatic change to the financial policy of the European Union that is now happening. But can we put it this way? Perhaps it's a beneficial change. I'm not talking about political benefits or gains right now, because we will talk about that later, but let's talk about economic gains. It is said that the German economy is the type of economy that is very strongly based on exports, not internal consumption, but rather exports. So trade. That's the same goes for China, and China is the main commercial partner of Germany, other countries as well. But it's true of the European area as well. So perhaps within the interest of Germany as the dominating European economy is to maintain that common market, to make sure that that market is relatively uniform, that there are not too many diversities and tensions within this market. And so sort of maintaining southern economies is, in a sense, lies within the interest of Germany. In Poland, we often hear the argument that money that comes to us from Brussels go back there, go back to the German economy in part, because all infrastructural programs and so on and so forth, many people do these calculations. As we know, Poland is the fourth largest trade partner for Germany when it comes to import, and fifth when it comes to exports. I think we are ahead of Italy, in fact. So perhaps this would actually constitute a strength of German policy and economy, the way of thinking that it's, it's within the interest of Germany not to have poor neighbors in the south or in the east. I know that Hans-Werner Siem warns that this is just the sort of financing that is going to ruin us all. But perhaps I imagine that this could be one of the justifications, that all in all, there lies an economic interest of Germany here, that, it's in the interest of the Germans for the Italian economy to develop, or at least not to fall into slowdown, and that it's also important for France to modernize and for Central and Eastern Europe to close the gap that is still there as a result of communism.
Mike.
Okay, yes. Well, thank you. This is a very, very important question, and I think a very understandable one. Let me first say that in my political career, I was for 6 years responsible as president of the German industry. And so I think this, if you wish, criticism of Germany is very familiar to me. And in fact, I agree with that. Let me take the euro as an example. Poland is in the fortunate situation not to be part of the euro. But when the euro came, by the way, I supported the euro when it was introduced in the late 90s, early of the century. When the euro came, Italy was a formidable competitor of the German industry, especially northern Italy was. Why? Because while Italy was unable to really put in the necessary reforms, it could always devalue its currency and stay competitive. And now that when the euro came, suddenly the following happened. The euro was much too strong for Italy and for Spain, by the way, also to France and Greece and so on. And it was too weak for Germany. And who benefited from this development? Indeed, the German exports, they went through the roof. And Italy's exports diminished. And as a result, German industry benefited from the euro at the expense of the south of Europe. I give you this as an example of a Europe one-size-fits-all policy, which helps Germany, but is detrimental to the south. So I admit that this was detrimental to the south. Now, the German industry didn't complain about a euro which is too weak, unfortunately. But why did the German industry did not complain? Because the rest of the German society had and will have to pay the price for an enormous debt piled up by the European Central Bank by giving out credits to countries, which at the end, somebody will have to pay. So in other words, I think it is immoral of the German industry to benefit from this low euro and at the expense of the general German taxpayer. So the criticism which you sort of implied in your question is also a criticism which we make in Germany. I think it is crazy to load the world with German exports and then make the German taxpayers via this package which we just discussed pay for the negative impact of this development. So here I get, and I do agree with, of course, let me say this very clearly, I agree with Mr. Arak that we do need stimulus packages in this unprecedented pandemic. I do agree with that. And I do agree with Madame Schulz that the European Union has a lot to offer, like a common market. But I totally disagree with having to do this on a centralized basis. So very much like the vaccines, it would have been the responsibility of the country to come up with a package to revive the country, because each situation in the country is different. And I have a lot of bad experience, also in my previous business experience, with Brussels programs which never worked. Look, we are trying to catch up now with digitalization. We are trying to catch up with all sorts of other things. we are trying to catch up with Apple and with the other technological companies. Their success was not a result of Washington's initiatives. Their success was a result of an economy and a system of freedom which made sure that these kind of companies could develop. We in Europe take the opposite view. We believe that the state now should take it into its hands. And the bottom line of this huge package is more power for Brussels, more state intervention. And that is where I disagree. It should have been done more by the countries.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I wanted not to be critical about Germany. I wanted to be positive because my argument was that this is some kind of imperative of solidarity, that because Germany's economy is so export-oriented or trade-oriented, that it is in interest also German company to to have a level playing field and the diminishing differences in Europe, and this is why Germany as a state is then inclined to support Italy or Poland and or Eastern Central Europe. And it would be interesting to see what is the difference between the country which I share your criticism, which are in Euro and they have no chances to catch up, and the countries which, as Poland, are outside the Euro, but they are doing better, but they have also this, stimulus from outside and so on. And actually, I wanted to be a little critical about Poland. Because for me, there's always the striking traits of our contribution, also contribution in this discussion by Madame Scholz and Director Arak, that we are always talking about, our national perspective. And maybe you should also think, in the questions. So we need money, is okay. Then we can accept everything because we receive money from the Brussels. But we should think also, I think, about the Europe as general. Europe and the development of Europe. We can share also the concern of our German friends or French friends about this etatization and so on. So for me, it is a striking, and I wanted to say that German, for me, it's an advantage to think, a bit broader categories, not only national categories, whereas in Poland, because of our situation, we are still thinking about itself. But I agree with you that maybe method is false, in which we try to solve these general European problems. Okay, but now do dyrektora Araka. No właśnie chciałem się spytać, czy pan nie widzi tego problemu uzależnienia?
So I would like to ask if you see that problem of dependency, because perhaps it's a strategy of a poor relative, who's not asking about the consequences as long as the rich uncle pays my bills. So perhaps the uncle goes bankrupt and or comes to me and asks me to reimburse him, or perhaps I get completely dependent on that rich uncle. So, I apply for more money every year. So perhaps this could lead us to sort of infantilizing Poland, because when you talk to people throughout the regions, the first question you hear is the one about external financing and getting rid of your own responsibility. It's in Wielkopolska region. You hear it often, the government is not giving us enough money because, the government is responsible for everything, instead of enjoying the fact that perhaps we could do something more using our own resources. And the same goes for the entire country. it started with yes, yes, yes by Prime Minister Marcinkiewicz. It was, I think, pathetic. It is pathetic to use money to measure our successes in Europe. It's like with the great orchestra of Christmas charity that needs a record collection every year. Brussels is not a money pit. It's not a box from which we can a money chest. I know that I'm being harsh here, but I just wanted to energize this discussion a little bit, perhaps. What I can say, Professor, is that I agree with you. That's why refundable support is controversial. This is not something that we can agree to 100% because it does not necessarily pay off, owing to some additional factors that are associated here. I think in 2006 there was a summit with Prime Minister Marcinkiewicz, and I agree with you on this. It's all about the quality of the money, where that money is spent, what projects it supports. We should also find additional sources of financing that are possible, that could be implemented in Poland. The truth is that the private sector in our country, starting in 2004, it has lived on the shoulders of the public sector. The investment rate of our private enterprises is much lower than the EU average, and the public sector is sort of catching up with its investments. And normally this would be performed by private enterprises. So we have gotten used to that influx of additional money every year. In the years to come, we will have to create our own internal mechanisms for that. There was a risk that that we would become a net payer by 2020, that we would have to pay in more money than we benefit from. It's slightly moved over time, but what it means is that we have still several years to go before we have to create such a mechanism within the private sector so that we can finance certain undertakings. And today, you know, that reaching out hand from business is relatively long. And I really liked that remark about how we talk about Europe in Poland and how it is being discussed in France or Germany, because Germans, when talking about Europeans, they mean themselves, at least typically they would. That's what I see in my practice. The French, the French mean about themselves in 30% and 70% about themselves, and we talk about ourselves because we are only focused on what affects us. It hardly ever happens that we use the perspective of the entire region. And I think that is going to change as we are more exposed to experts exporting services. Today, we export more services than goods. And it's no longer the case that we only export auto parts. We export software, legal services, and so on within the European Union. And this is not just about pricing competition, because IT specialists make as much as they would make in other Western countries. So within software houses, the centers that we have in Poland, they employ Italians, Portuguese just as well, and you see that in statistics. Several dozen thousand expats are employed in these corporations as IT specialists, for instance. So that model is evolving, and as Poland is going to become similar in terms of economic development, they want to be similar to Germany, German economic development before the introduction of Europe. Polish zloty is now very weak. In January and in 2020, we actually had an excess in international trade. Starting 2015, every year we note an increasing exports as compared to imports. So if that trend is maintained, we will more often consider what's happening in other countries, because that's going to constitute our interest. And so far, I think we were not focused enough on that. I hope that with our increasing exports potential, we will devote more attention to that. But it also goes hand in hand with the financial dependency, because I think we're at least well, it seems that the European Union or the European Commission, by sending so much money to Central Europe, including us, the Commission is aware that we will have economic growth over the next 10 years. So in the years to come, we will be that place where economic growth will exceed 4%. It will be, well, over 3% by 2030. So potentially, this is where the engine of the economic of the European economy is going to lie. So that money is associated with a certain expectation, namely that in the future, close future, when Poland, well, let's say 10 years, if we exceed GDP per capita of an EU average, or that GDP per capita of Italy and Spain, which is possible within the horizon of 10 years. And if that happens, in the years to come, we will support economic development of the Union, of the community, as one of the largest countries and growing economy linked closely with other countries in the common market. So there is a risk there. That's how I see it. That's how I perceive it. They say, you know, we are investing here now. We are giving you money for that convergence, but we want to benefit from it. We want to benefit from your economic growth. We want to transfer that money and you know, win the 80 euro cents back on cohesion policy. So 80 cents back from every euro spent, because this is what it used to be like in the years past. So nothing is for free, but it's still very beneficial for the member states. Thank you. Thank you very much for this debate. I think it was very interesting. We focused so far on the economic matters, but now let's switch to politics. If you would like to take the floor later on, I'm talking to the panelists from this first part. If you have time, if you want to stay with us, you are very welcome. In the second part, we will hear Mr. Henkel, Marianidze, and Paola Borchia, who will hopefully join us soon. I still don't see him, but we expect him soon. So politics is always linked with economy. We know it. Now in Europe, we have three processes happening, fairly radical changes. On the one hand, what we just discussed, namely, oh, I think I see Paolo. Right, so we have a unique economic situation, and there are these unique ambitions of the Union to do transformation when it comes to digitization, energy. It's not by accident that this whole program is called New Generation EU. On the other hand, there are issues related to politics, because it all means also transforming the relationship between EU institutions and member states. Yesterday, I took part in the meeting of a steering committee for the Conference on the Future of Europe. There were 3 commissioners there, representatives of the presidency, and so on. But there were many voices from the parliament calling for a deep political change, going towards larger centralization or federalization. Mr. Verhofstadt was in charge of all that. Well, he played an important role. And there are also some cultural changes happening. They are just as important, whether associated with the migration crises. To me, it's surprising that today the French or the Germans discuss identity, while in Poland that topic had been discussed very strongly at the point of our accession. So I think we should consider all these things together. So my first question now goes to Hans-Olaf Henkel. And it's actually going back to what you were talking about, centralization of decisions, of decision-making processes. I see it on a daily basis, and it has never been so easily accepted. So there is no, I know that it's to some extent associated with Brexit. Nobody's really talking about the market anymore. Nobody's talking about watching out over free competition and fighting monopols. The entire discourse, political discourse, has changed. Now we talk about planning, zero emission economy by 2050, and then some objectives for 2030. But then you need a specific trajectory for specific sectors, and the countries will have to, and sectors, economic sectors will have to deal with it. A lot of reporting happening, national plans for energy and climate. So all that, you know, when you centralize things, you have more reporting going on as well. There is more interference by officials from institutions. But on the other hand, there is another tendency as well. And these two tendencies are intertwined. Namely, there is a revolutionary tendency. What I mean here is that, for instance, when the European Parliament is talking, there is some sort of a moral blackmail by the Greens happening. You know, they tell us we have to save the planet now. Let's not surrender. If there is a goal, if there is an objective, people are sort of bidding to get that goal even more ambitious, you know, 40% reduction of emissions. No, 50. No, let's go to 55 or 60 or 65. Well, you could say 100. So these two tendencies are very clearly visible. To centralize, to take, well, it's said, for instance, that offshore energy sources are going to be developed, but perhaps the union should do that and to monitor and steer all that. And when we are talking about the electrical grid, then the decisions should not be taken by electricity companies because they have their own particular interest at heart. You know, this is a free market and various interests are there, but that's not even mentioned. It's all about centralizing. So you mentioned that, you said that, but you also said that what we need is a sort of a stimulus. You agreed with Mr. Arak that we do need that stimulus, that we need some sort of a political framework that will set a general strategy and some financial incentives as well. Because with all this regional diversity, things wouldn't have worked otherwise. So how do you see that reinforcement of the role of the Commission? can all these goals, all these objectives, like, recovery of economy, modernization, Green Deal, perhaps it could be done otherwise. Can it be done in a different way?
Well, yes and no. Let me at the outset say, so there's no misunderstanding, that I am a real supporter of the European Union. And I think this is the best thing which has happened ever after the Second World War to Europe. And within the European Union, the most important thing, as you rightfully said, Professor Krasnodębski, is the common market. And I always support the common market in the European Union. I was a very, I would say, rather eloquent advocate for the expansion of the European Union to more than the original countries, because the market was expanded, and therefore the benefits to all consumers in the European Union became obvious. We were becoming more productive. The trouble arrived when politicians decided not only to expand the European Union, but also to deepen it. And I remember very well those political comments, those politically correct comments when I asked a commissioner whether it was Santer or whether it was Prodi or whether it was Juncker. When I asked them, look, what is more important, deepening or expanding? They said both. Well, that's wrong. And Brexit is a result of trying to do both things at the same time at too much speed. So for me, the Brexit has been the biggest blow to the European community ever since its inception. And since we also talk economics, let's not forget that Britain's economy is as big as 19 smaller and medium-sized countries together. So Britain leaving the European market means that the equivalent of 19 smaller and medium-sized economies leaving Europe. So it's a big blow. And I would have expected the European Commission and the other heads of state and government to take a lesson when they try to respond to the corona crisis. And the lesson should not have been the same medicine which drove the British out of the European Union in the first place. More Brussels, more centralization, more programs from Brussels. So, and this is my basic criticism. So the political consequences of more will be, in my view, a danger that more countries are one of these days deciding to hit the road and leave. This is currently, in my view, some of the countries, and I will take my neck out here. I do appreciate what Mr. Arak said, and I think he's 100% right on what he said. But is this the message by some of the Polish politicians? Do they take that message, or will they one of these days, when they become net payers, discover the disadvantages and leave also? That's a very valid question. So in my view, this package is failing in many aspects because it increases the danger of failure through centralization, or let me say death by complexity. That's really what's happening. And now you were mentioning the green program, 37% of this package should go to the climate change programs, modernization, digitalization, 20%. Look, the Commission has financed in the 70s and the 80s. I was then president of IBM Europe, and I watched it very, very well. They spent billions of D-marks, French francs, and British pounds on trying to come up with European IT champions. All this money failed. Nothing happened. Yes, we did get some good champions, and Mr. Arak mentioned a few companies in Poland. I'd like to mention SAP as the largest application provider in the world from Germany, but that wasn't a result of Brussels, not even Berlin. This was a result of 5 entrepreneurs. So we should make sure that Brussels doesn't use this pandemic as an excuse to even get more power, and they were successful. And we should make sure that the Greens don't use the pandemic to get more of their pet projects financed. It has nothing to do with the pandemic. What, by the way, let me be constructive. And before that, one other criticism, by the way, even Horizon as a result of this finance package was reduced. So where the European Commission did the best or could do the best in basic research, they even reduced the money. So what could they have done? They should have increased the R&D for research to anticipate and prevent future pandemics. That's what should have been part of the program. They should have come up with some ideas of how to develop additional manufacturing facilities for vaccines. They didn't do this. They should have come up with how to produce additional masks and be prepared next time, come up with more additional equipment and ICUs, intensive care units. They didn't do that. Instead, the politicians used to ride their particular political hobby horses. And now, let's face it, the programs, the sub-programs developed in the countries are developed by country bureaucrats, not by the economy or the free market system. And then these programs are going to Brussels and they are being judged by Brussels bureaucrats. And by the way, I might remind you of what happened in Italy immediately after they got the support or the commitment for the support of more than 200 billion euros. The Conte government, did what? They promised tax reductions, they promised additional pensions, more social programs. That has nothing to do neither with the pandemic, nor with the green order or modernization or reconstruction of the economy. I hope that the new president or the new prime minister in Italy will do a better job. So let me clearly say that this program will result in a gigantic shift of power to Brussels. It will, and already Brussels has become some sort of a referee of how to allocate the money, so they will become even more powerful. And I tell you, Britain will not be the last country to have left the Union, unfortunately, one of these days. I can see at the horizon, Poland, Hungary, and a few other countries, which finally might hit the road, which will be bad. But I can assure you of one thing. Germany is going to be the last country to leave.
Tak, dziękuję bardzo, dziękuję bardzo. I teraz...
Right, thank you very much for that. And now let us move on to Marianice. Mr. Henkel said that we should not, well, that he supports the EU common market and the expansion of the European Union, the enlargement and not the deepening, while that trend towards the deepening prevails. Some even would like to make the EU even smaller, to make it even deeper. This is how we can read some of the statements of President Macron. So I think that the saving, the Europe can be saved by what we can see in Georgia. If we expand, we will not deepen. The deepening, well, in Poland, we support the idea of the European enlargement and extension in the economic sense. The deepening vis-à-vis Poland is about bringing us up to embrace democracy, teaching us who we are supposed to elect, who we are supposed not to elect, how we are supposed to live, who we are going to marry, and who we are not supposed to marry. And this is absolutely not within the competencies of the EU. So if we really left individual states to solve different problems, perhaps we would be able to get better results. But now, Marianice, I would like to ask you the following question. Georgia is an aspiring country. It is a country aspiring to the EU, and it really faces many problems. How you, from the Georgian perspective, can see what is happening in the European Union, both in economic trends, but also in political trends? How does Georgia look at it? Does Georgia want to be a part of such a super state which is managed from Brussels?
We don't hear you.
We can't hear you.
No, we don't hear you.
No, we can't hear you. Your microphone seems to be off.
I don't hear you.
You seem to be unmuted. You seem to be muted.
Maybe you have switch off your device.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, great. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Krasnodebski for organizing this important meeting and in general for the very intensive cooperation with my country. It's an honor and a privilege for me to attend today's meeting and to discuss the future of Europe with such distinguished participants. On the one hand, it's very symbolic that as a citizen of Georgia, I'm now discussing the future of Europe with our Polish, German, and Italian colleagues, with EU citizens. On the other hand, it's a very nice decision of you, Professor Krasnodebski, to allow me as a Georgian to be a part of the discussion on this topic, as Georgia's future, as a future of a nation and a potential EU member depends directly on the EU. In this way, we will get used to not only discussing our common future, but also to shape this future together. We urgently need the European Union, which is a stable economy and is becoming a stable, strong and future-oriented political entity. As you all know, Georgia intends to officially apply for the EU membership in 2024. This is the declared goal of the government, but above all, it is a civilizational decision of my country and of my nation. We are already enjoying the intensive results of the association with the European Union. The deep and comprehensive free trade area agreement has made it possible that for the EU to become Georgia's largest trading partner by far. As a result of the visa liberalization, more than 3.5 million Georgians have visited the EU countries.
Excuse me, there's some. Excuse me.
Have long-term consequences for the complete Europeanization of my country. Direct investments from EU countries are growing continuously. The corona pandemic has slowed this process down, but the positive trend can be clearly seen. The political and physical rapprochement between Georgia and the EU must, however, continue more intensively. Why is Georgia so important for the EU and what we are bringing with us into the EU? First, it is Europafreude. Yes, Georgia is a possibly more Europe-friendly country than many others, already members of the European Union. But this joy in Europe is not irrational from our side. We see the EU as a value-based, longest peace and welfare project in the history. The joy of the healthy coexistence of all European nations and states in solidarity would perhaps be very important precisely in those difficult times when the EU is facing the most serious crisis during its existence. Every crisis is to be used to discover the opportunities and to drive the further development, especially now and here in Europe. The fact that the EU is acting in solidarity and simply rightly during the pandemic period, which was coated with a few mistakes, give me the firm belief that the European project will continue to develop and to move on to a completely different level. It's more precise design, form, and the content should be discussed intensively. If we do that, I am sure we will come up with the best for all of us and decide that it is best for the European Union. Ultimately, the process is a process in which we can allow ourselves to make mistakes. But by improving these mistakes, we can continue to learn and further develop the peace and welfare project in Europe. What is the vision here? How we do envision the future of Europe? Will it just remain a free internal market? Or will it take on the form of a federal state? Will it be a federation or a confederation? Will Switzerland perhaps become a model for a future Europe where every citizen of proud Swiss is a proud Swiss, but all of them are proud Ticino, Basel, Geneva, or Bernese? Will there soon be a European constitutional nation formed by many other ethnical nations? What form will be the best answer to the challenges on the very complex modernity? The globalization process is now world's biggest, what brings us to the more global risks. It's not just the economic and climate problems. As long as the EU is not yet in a position to act in a consolidated and correspondingly effective manner on foreign and security policy challenges, very dangerous things are happening in the immediate vicinity of Europe's borders. Russia continues to create the new realities, almost unhindered. These new realities are not and cannot be in line with Europe's interests because they are based on completely different values. Other dangers are not long in coming either. China brings both the opportunities and the major risks. It is extremely interesting that when it comes to Europe, the interest of Russia, China, and maybe some other players coincide. The goal of these players is not to allow the realization of a certain form of the United States of Europe, because Europe is in such a form where the welfare state in the form of the social constitutional state becomes a reality, could be an incredibly attraction and accordingly a danger for them. Yes, there are the issues we are thinking about in Georgia. My country doesn't want to be and will not be just a recipient country. We want to make an intensive contribution in ensuring that the European Union as a successful project remains a success. In addition to the above-mentioned joy on Europe, Georgia also brings very good economic opportunities for the future of Europe, which may be of strategic importance. I'm currently in Vienna. The Austrian government has already spent more than 33 billion euros to support the local economy during the pandemic and expects around 3.5 billion euros from the economic reconstruction funds. Of course, Georgia cannot afford these standards of economic support, but the government is doing a lot to help the people in the country as effectively as possible and to stimulate the economy as quickly as possible. The steps that are being taken in Georgia are implicitly intended to strengthen the role and importance of our country for Europe and to make Georgia compatible for the entire European economy. The COVID-19 outbreak posed a huge challenge to our economy that disrupt Georgia's positive economic development. The last year, Georgia's GDP growth rate fell to minus 6.1% and foreign trade by 20%. Thanks to the healthy structures of the economy and the targeted investments in the large infrastructure projects, highways, ports, and railway systems, according to the assessment of the International Monetary Fund, the Georgian economy is expected to grow at least 5.3% in the post-pandemic period. The strategically important projects must be underlined. Anaklia deep sea port, Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railway, White Stream project, which is intended to supply Europe with the Caspian gas resources directly from the Black Sea to Romania, a new submarine cable project from Georgia to Romania, which will enable to export the electricity produced in Georgia and wider region to EU market. It must be underlined that the connectivity and cooperation serve as the best instrument for development, peace, and stability. Therefore, it is in Georgian best interest to develop regional interconnection and economic cooperation for further stable development of our country. We bring all of this to join the European project. It should therefore be emphasized once again that it is absolutely appropriate and legitimate for Georgia to discuss their common future with all other EU nations. And this discussion should definitely be continued. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, there was some problem with acoustic, but we could hear you and understand you because there was, I think, with a micro, but generally it was understandable. So it's for me it is obvious that when we are talking about Europe, Europe is not union. So I hope that we also continue our dialogue also with our British colleagues. They are not in the union, but they are European countries. But also we have to discuss also with countries which are not in the union yet or anymore, no more. Also the future of the union. So it's and we shouldn't forget when we discuss about political development and economic development, we shouldn't forget geopolitical situation. Because I agree with you, what our friends in western part of the continent sometimes forget that Russia is a different civilization, and we know this. And all the history of Russia has shown that it is a different civilization. For this reason, it is very. I don't know if Mr. Henkel, read this article by Michal Stürmer in the Welt, which was actually a little annoying, talking about, new dialogue with Russia, but also he finished this article, that the west part of the continent could support Poland or Russia, but not at the same time Poland and Russia. So it was a very strange article, but I agree, we shouldn't be realistic, and what we are talking about, the European economy, this is also the questions how competitive this economy will be in vis-a-vis in relation to China and Russia and also United States. But now let's go to Pablo Borchia. Zadam pytanie po polsku. Dziękuję, że pan znalazł.
Let me ask this question in Polish. Thank you very much for finding time to be with us. We've been talking quite much. We've been talking quite much about Southern Europe and about how the monetary union influenced some, the inhibition of the development of Italy, as Mr. Henkel said, and it was also considered in Poland that Italy, not only as one of the founding states of the European Union, but also historically, heart of Europe plays a huge role or has a huge role to play in the Europe of the future. For the Poles, Italy has always been the capital of Europe. Rome has been always the capital of Europe for us. And this is something that has its roots in history. So even more, we are interested in the answer to the question, what is the attitude of Italy to the change of the European policy, both in economic trends, but also in some political tendencies. How do you evaluate the economic consequences as well as political consequences? Are there such opinions that come up in Italy of concern whether the processes of the centralization of the EU, Mr. Henkel referred to as well as other people, and what is the position of Italian conservatives about it? How do Italian conservatives, our friends Fraternitaria, how do they see the future of Europe? And what could we do for the future together? Over to you, Mr. Borgia.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I will speak Italian, if you don't mind. I see that the translation is
right. Let me speak Polish, because interpretation is really very good. That is why I'm going to use interpretation. So I'm going to speak Italian, of course, and not Polish. All right, Professor, first of all, I would like to thank very much for the invitation extended to me to participate in this initiative. Well, I was elected to the European Parliament for the first time. That is why it is a great honor for me to be able to participate in this panel in such a distinguished group of participants. First of all, if I am to just tell you, jokingly a little bit, as Italian journalists ask us if Lega is pro-European now, then a little bit jokingly, I answer, only semi-jokingly. Then I say that perhaps it is not that we are becoming pro-European, perhaps it is Europe that is standing on our side. That we have such parties, just like your party, which want to create an alternative on this side, on the center-right side. So we can say that partially Europe finally started to listen. This is what we said before. For years, we have been saying quite loudly that it is necessary to change the course, especially in terms of fiscal policy of Europe. Here, we have been talking about some information that started to come up in 2011, when the huge economic crisis which came up back then seemed to be terrible, and then it was followed by COVID. So it all demonstrates the root causes and consequences of the imposition of some savings onto individual countries. It is a paradox that now, at the time when some of those rules that were created in the Stability Pact in 2022, let us also hope that for 2023, at the time when it's been suspended, it is becoming a reflection of what we have been always talking about. But for us to be heard, it took an unprecedented crisis. And only now did they understand in Brussels that those savings, those austerity measures that were imposed were absolutely unproportional or incompatible with what could be done by individual countries. So from this perspective of the democratic representation, I think that those countries that presented an alternative option or an alternative vision of Europe, we were always in such an isolation. So if we compare the European Union from union with less developed democracies, I would like to note that in those less developed democracies, younger democracies, opposition usually has more voice than in the European Parliament. And I think that it is something which is not talked about frequently.
A me non piace invocare l'immagine mitologica di Cassandra che era solita fare delle previsioni funeste che però purtroppo con il tempo si dimostravano essere corrette. Per cui concludendo la risposta alla sua domanda, dopo aver fatto questo ampio preambolo, io ritengo che la politica nei prossimi mesi dovrà avere la capacità e la sensibilità per capire che la società europea alla fine di questa crisi, che è stata crisi sanitaria ma poi è diventata crisi economica e sociale, l'Europa si ritroverà con una società più povera, una società più spaventata e una società che avrà
so that it will turn out a poorer society, more scared, and well, the society that trusts politicians less. So I really hope, I would like the European Union to express the sensitivity it did not express earlier, and realized that when policy is developed, it will have to take the bottom-up approach. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo za tą ciekawą wypowiedź. No tak, mamy tutaj trzy perspektywy też.
All right, we have three perspectives. We have here three perspectives, and we have to keep in mind all those three perspectives. The external one from Georgia. We also have the perspective from Italy. Well, we have a very strong voice, which is pro-European from Georgia. So this is also what was mentioned by Mr. Henkel. I have to stress it when he talked about different political transformation. And it is also about the Italian perspective. And now I think I can start with what was mentioned at the end by Carlo Borchi. Because in a way we can talk about the recovery program that we are talking about. It was a reaction to the crisis situation. I remember in the first period when suddenly the world stopped. Everything came to a halt. It turned out that it was not possible, that it was absolutely not possible, that it couldn't simply be stopped. And that was so mobile society, all the time on the move. And well, suddenly it was a moment when all the countries started to act by themselves. Well, I wouldn't be that critical talking about it. We were also looking terrified at what was happening in Lombardy, in Italy. Well, individual countries were closing down their borders. And then the question came up, why do we need the European Union as a political entity at all? If in this situation, even it was not possible to do it, we were completely unprepared to do it. And it was not even possible to coordinate it. Then there was another phase that we talked also about, well, the reaction to that was supposed to be the recovery program, and that was about the pressure that was to be exerted by such countries as Italy, as France, as well as the members of the European Parliament. And then the recovery program was embarked and hard negotiations, which later on were stretched throughout the whole previous year. And then the vaccination program started. And well, today I am becoming even very critical about it, because it turns out that there are some limits of centralization, that there is something wrong with this method. And now you are saying, well, you said that it is connected with the lack of social sensitivity. Well, lack of social sensitivity. In the German, they say Grande Europäe, but in that sense that I like Europe, I like diversity, I like the European diversity. I know how different the Germans are. I lived there for many years. How different Italians are, the Poles are. What is the difference between our nations? But it is interesting. However, what is lacking is what you were talking about, empathy. Empathy and understanding of totally different social needs. You said that well, the society is poorer, more terrified, and we have to respond to it.
After the last week in Brussels, I would be very pessimistic about that, because even Commissioner Jourova, when she was talking about the launch of a new platform where citizens can express their opinions regarding the future of Europe, she said, but I'm dealing with very toxic matters, and you can be surprised when you see what people say. We can be surprised to find out that the world is different outside of the Brussels bubble. This was said by Madam Commissioner. It was not in a public meeting. I hope I'm not revealing any secrets. So there is certain awareness of the fact that we are living in certain detachment from the citizens. If the citizens take the voice, it's rather an organized voice. So now there's a question. Mr. Henkel said that the pandemic is going to have some political consequences in his country as well. And we do see certain discrepancies between Eastern and Western lands, the parts of the country, regions of the country. There are some unpleasant phenomena like AfD in the Saxony being radicalized. It's your former party that has now become something completely different. But on the other hand, we will probably be dealing with a leftist government. It's possible that we will have a chancellor representing the Greens. On the third hand, so to say, there are some not entirely understandable decisions, like the continuing of Nord Stream 2. So there is a certain polarizing situation politically. On the other hand, the right-wing part has become stronger. On the other hand, it goes the other way. So you also said one more very interesting thing, that there has never been so much disenchantment when it comes to the EU. I would add that disenchantment refers to the government as well. One of the philosophers during a video conference, philosophers from Germany, he said that he's never seen so many Germans losing trust in their government to such an extent as they do now. I think maybe back in 2015, the situation might have been similar. So we have some sort of a crisis on our hands. And now, how could we, on the European level, how could we react to such tendencies, very polarizing tendencies? Do you think the European Union would, or the European institutions could help, or are they rather in the way of the process? So this is a question to you, Mr. Henkel.
Yeah, thank you for this question. You're quite right. It is very interesting, remarkable, because Chancellor Merkel has 2 days ago, for the first time in her 16 years in government, publicly apologized for a decision. By the way, that's the first time I have ever seen or heard of a German politician apologizing for a mistake. Neither Adenauer, nor Kiesinger, nor Brandt, nor Kohl, nor Schröder has ever apologized for having made a mistake. Now, this is not to say that they never made mistakes. So I found this very unusual. And for me, it's very clear why she did this. She admitted a mistake which was rather insignificant, because she announced that Easter Thursday and Easter Saturday should be holidays because of the Corona crisis, without getting the legal support for it. Now, why did she do this? Well, she did do this in order to make sure that her legacy is being read like this. She made fantastic decisions. She went out of the nuclear energy because we had a tsunami in Japan overnight. She let in more than 1 million refugees, mostly young men, without knowing where they came from and what they wanted. She came up with a hilarious, I would say, energy policy, which ruins long-term German competitiveness. And she allowed the ECB to become a union of debtors rather than a stable currency union, which was promised. So, yeah, that is exactly what happened. And for me, it's now very obvious that the mismanagement of the Corona crisis is one additional mistake she made. And the mistake she made is very clearly, she was the initiator of delegating this to Brussels. Now, we don't have a responsibility in Brussels for countries' health. As a matter of fact, in Germany, that is not even the responsibility of Berlin. It is the clear responsibility of the Länder. Yet she decided to push this responsibility to Brussels. And that has, in my view, or could have, colossal impact on her standing. And it already has a colossal impact on the standing of her party. So you can see that a mismanagement of the Corona crisis can, in Germany, have colossal political consequences.
Tak, dziękuję rzeczywiście.
Right, thank you for this. I think that in all the countries, that situation is going to have a huge impact. President Macron yesterday said, I don't have to apologize. So that illustrates the tensions that are happening since France is now a risk zone. In Poland, as we know, we've had a bloody dictatorship in Poland for the last 5 years. We don't know who the dictator is, and that dictator is not even able to force people to wear masks. So in Poland, as usual, we typically have anarchy, so the usual anarchy. You know, everyone thinks they know best. Everyone is smarter than everyone else. So, but yes, there is no middle here, as opposed to Germany, where number of daily cases is relatively limited. We were relatively liberal because the central government is not able to force our citizens, not now. They are not able to force the behaviors that would be expected by epidemiologists. So this is going to have considerable political outcomes. Perhaps from the EU perspective, that's going to be a positive outcome, because the disliked Polish government may pay the price, but perhaps we hopefully not. But going back to Georgia now, I think I see that no matter the fact that Georgia is not as yet the member of the European Union, it's the member of Eastern Partnership, considering the number of Georgian restaurants that we had in Warsaw, because now they are closed down, we've got Georgian bakeries right on the corner. So, you know, we actually had hachapuri yesterday for lunch. This was never possible before. So I think we are becoming closer neighbors than ever. So I have a question to you, because talking about the consequences, political consequences of this crisis, I heard a question yesterday from a Polish journalist. He asked me if, during the crisis, it was a provoking question, of course, but he asked if autocratic states handle things better in the crisis, like China, for instance, autocracies, or for instance, Russia. They did manufacture Sputnik vaccine. Some people would rather see Sputnik than AstraZeneca vaccine, but I would worry about that. But so, under the circumstances, there are some views or opinions cropping up saying that countries handled with a strong hand handle crises better than those countries that rely on pluralism, democracy, freedom of choice, and human rights. We have to limit those rights now. So, from the Georgian point of view, maybe from the point of view of other countries of Eastern Partnership, are these opinions, is the sort of, are they appearing or not? Are they there or not?
Can you hear me now? Great. Thank you very much for this question. You mentioned the Eastern Partnership. It's a huge instrument, really very important instrument to us, to Georgia. Also to develop our society from the post-totalitarian society, I would say, to the real European democracy. This instrument, we try to use all these instruments really good, and we try to be Musterschüler of this process, and we enjoy really very much the process of modernizing of our society, also in the frames of Eastern Partnership. It's a very good tool and instrument for that. You mentioned pluralism, democracy, or authoritarian, I would say, management. This is no question for us. This is not a question. It cannot be asked in Georgia. We try, and we try to build a democracy like European art, very normal European democracy, and we will remain. We will stay on this way. Maybe it is now not so ideal form for at the moment, but we are on the very right way, and we will definitely continue further this way. I need to be very there are some countries also in the Eastern Partnership. They have a little bit different view in this regard, but I can speak for my country, and I can talk only for Georgians. Democracy has no alternative, and it will. We want to be a part of Europe, and without being democracy, we have no European future. It means we'll continue to develop real, developed democracy in Georgia. This is my answer on this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now the last questions to Pablo Borchia, and this is the questions because we know there's a new government in Italy. This is very broad coalition. For some people, it was surprise that also your party joined this coalition. But I think that I agree we have a general problem how we have to react to the new state of mind of our societies, yeah, and this growing poverty, probably the fear, the changes of the life, and also differentiation, because probably even if Mr. Henkel said that Germany or France will be also poorer, but I think that the stronger states will be probably relatively stronger, and weaker and more weak. Yeah. So how could we, I mean, the parties or the people, the citizens of the traditional attitude, of the conservative, react to this situation, and what can we do on the European level? How can we influence the policy of the Commission, of the whole Union?
Sì, grazie per la domanda, ma chiaramente...
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I would start with a statistical analysis. Unfortunately, the numbers show us that Italy have paid the most when it comes to the loss of GDP, mostly when it comes to the number of deaths in the course of the pandemic. So the numbers alone allow us to understand how the economic and social crisis is being viewed in Italy. Macroeconomic forecasts tell us that Q4 of 2023, that's going to be the time when Italy will finally be able to rebound, to recover to the pre-COVID period when it comes to the economy. Well, other than statistics and economic forecasts, we have to consider the policies that introduce certain restrictions related to the pandemic. There have been a number of restrictions also when it comes to social mobility. It seems that it did bring certain positive results, which is reflected in the statistics. So now, if you're asking me about the participation of my party in this broad government coalition, I do think that it was a very brave decision on the part of Matteo Salvini. It was a decision based on responsibility. Others decided to take different decisions. They were hoping to first see the outcome on the decision. But our party, my party, is very much able to manage things, to manage the situation. We showed that not only in the northern regions of the country, but also in the middle and southern part of the country. We represent the spirit of entrepreneurship of the country. And so when we talk about economic activities of the Mauro Draghi government, the vaccination plan, and the development of a plan allowing for optimum investment of funds that should come from the recovery plan, from the recovery fund. Taking all these into consideration, I think it wouldn't be smart or responsible to refuse to take part in this experiment, in this political experiment, for sure. It's a very specific situation. We are talking about a government that's being supported by many different, very diversified parties. So it seems that now what we have to do is work on our priorities, at the same time leaving on the side things that divide us. perhaps that's going to be the case for the future government, a basically political government, the government that will truly reflect the vote of the people. So this new approach, the approach of combining debt, I think this is something that, well, time will tell if it was a good choice. I think it's a two-edged sword, because on the one hand, there are some positives to it. I think the stimulus, macroeconomic stimulus, is not going to be as vast as the mainstream parties were trying to make us believe. But on the other hand, we have to remember that we are not living in an ideal situation, in the perfect world. Sometimes when I talk to my colleagues from, well, my colleagues from other countries, they are surprised hearing that Italy was always, or used to be, the net payer into the budget. There was, well, other than one single year, for years, Italy always paid in more than they received back, than we received back. And it's also clear that as a result, Italians expected some sort of a response on behalf of Brussels, or a response from Brussels. I think the reaction time should have been shorter. Perhaps the reaction should have come earlier. Unfortunately, a year after the pandemic started, we have to admit that reaction type was not what we expected, what our citizens expected. So the difficulty of European institutions to respond quickly, this is something that we see even now. If you have a look at the distribution of vaccines and how that is proceeding. Now, talking about statistics, for instance, the rate of vaccinations in other advanced economies, like in the United States or in the UK, we all see that. We all see how quickly they are progressing. So unfortunately, I have to go back to the topic that I started with, namely that unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, the galaxy of conservative movements or central and right-wing movements, these parties used to claim that one of the major problems of Brussels is too much red tape, too much bureaucracy that would not allow for it to react quickly under difficult circumstances. But these voices that we raised were never before taken into consideration. To conclude, I would like to say that one of the major obstacles for next generation is going to be the priorities set out by Brussels, namely putting 37% as a climate goal. That could be a very positive decision for some countries, but it's not going to be good for Italy. During previous presentations, I heard that the Greens, as a political family, they were brought on many times, they were mentioned many times. I have to say that the Greens in Italy, they are not really there. They have vanished. We haven't had them since the 90s, really. But in other countries, I do see that that movement is gaining enormous influence when it comes to politics. Let's, for instance, talk about their influence in Germany, the Baden-Württemberg elections, or Austria, where the Greens are participating in the governing coalition. So I'm talking about it because in Italy, sometimes it's difficult to explain why the Greens are so strong elsewhere in Europe. Yesterday, I had a chance to take part in an online meeting organized by an association of Italian industry. Many parliamentarians, also MEPs from Italy, were participating. And yesterday I had to point out to the head, the chairman of that association, that I think that in specific topics like hydrogen, for instance, I did hear the chairman of an association of Italian entrepreneurs saying, or rather listing various possibilities that were never taken into account in the report. We were the only ones to reject it. The Greens later did as well, but only because all those who opposed didn't want to get into it. Sorry for such a long excursion beyond the topic, but going back to the topic at hand, I think that in the short term, we can agree to certain compromise. We can accept the change that's been proposed by Brussels, withhold the Stability Pact and introduce the new funds owing to the Next Generation package. I don't suppose that the government is able to achieve anything more than that. Undoubtedly, we can say that this situation is not beautiful, it's not nice, it's not what Brussels would like us to think. Thank you very much for your very interesting opinions, very diversified opinions. In my country as well, because Paolo Borgia said that the Greens have disappeared in Italy. In Poland, they never really played a role. They never had any political role, even though the attitude of the society to climate has been changing. It doesn't mean that that the green wave is not articulating some problems associated with the climate, but so the environmental awareness is rising. That's definitely happening. It's being reinforced. And the need of energy transformation is also there. But we never had specific parties in this respect. And I think that's the difference between European countries. There are some countries where the green wave really rolled through the society and truly influenced politics and policies in these countries. In Poland, we are a little bit concerned that we might have energy shortages. We are trying to adapt to EU policies, but these energy shortages are likely to curb our economic development. So for now, I would like to thank all the panelists. And now over to Julita Wieczyńska, who will be the moderator of a debate. I'm not sure if anyone would like to ask any questions, but we still have half an hour or so to take your questions. Of course, the panelists can ask questions as well, but if any one of the audience would like to ask them, this is the time to do that. So over to Julita now, please take the floor. And thank you on my behalf. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, again. Thank you, Professor, for inviting me to moderate this part of the discussion. I would like to first ask the question if there are any questions, if anyone would like to take the floor now to open our discussion. I don't see anyone for now, but let me ask you a question. So this is a question to our panelists, because I was intrigued in view of what we heard from Director Schulz. She sees a just chance for everyone in the acceleration of the development of new technologies. She thinks that all the countries that are starting at the same point, they can use enormous opportunities that lie ahead. They can use the funds from the recovery fund, so the resources from the recovery fund to support the new technology sector. But I'm curious to hear if your countries are preparing to make use of that money. There is always the risk mentioned by Professor Krasnodębski that many groups have gotten used to the influx of European money supporting certain activities and operations, and in truth, in some contexts, it's unthinkable to perform some actions without European funds. But I'm curious if in Germany, in Italy, in Poland as well, that's the question to Professor as well, if you gentlemen see some sort of a systemic attempt at good management of these funds, since that's a debt that we will leave to the future generations, perhaps that debt should at least bring as much benefit as possible.
Professor, perhaps over to you. I just wanted to say that sometimes I get emails, and I received an email from a group of citizens in connection with the upcoming vote in the parliament on the own funds, own resources. And these citizens write to me, don't ever accept it, don't consent to it. So this is a fear of the loss of sovereignty in Poland that is quite strong. And I get such emails. But the fact that someone can impose additional taxes on us, as Director Arak is saying, for example, the plastic tax, my group or my delegation this week voted not really very consistently, because they supported the idea of own resources of the EU, but at the same time they were skeptical about the plastic tax. So now, when we go back to the question, I think that Director Arak will answer best when he talks about the National Recovery Plan. I think that this is an attempt to combine the strategy with something which is bottom-up, that we can really report with different projects, especially as far as digital transformation is concerned. There was a hearing on digital transformation. And I understand that these projects, which are to be submitted, they will be considered. Deputy Minister, for example, is saying that actions for digital school equip students in laptops. I don't think it's very ambitious, because we've been hearing about it for years, but digitization of education, organization of exams, as well as the question of safety. We have to tell you that the fight against the digital exclusion is important. In terms of the public administration digitization, it's been improved very much. Everyone can really use these functions. Now, we don't really have to visit offices personally, the public administration. We know that there is a special group with the Prime Minister's office that are involved in the projects related to artificial intelligence. I would like it to really be developing. We really have great capacity in terms of our IT personnel. Even IBM, well, Mr. Henkel used to be president of IBM Europe. IBM has a center of Krakow, but we have this syndrome of Lewandowski. Lewandowski, who strikes goals for Bayern Munich, and we'd like our fantastic software developers started finally to strike goals for Poland. Lewandowski does not always get a ball to strike a goal in the national team. That is why he doesn't really get so good results in the Polish team. That is why I think that it's important for us to be able to focus on it, to bet on it. We have to go beyond laptops for schools. Same goes for energy. Julita, I have to tell you that I have an impression that quite frequently there is something which results from what I said at the beginning. It is correct. Poland first. But we forget that we act in a broader context and that some strategies, some aspirations are clear. And in this, I really admire Germany because they go ahead of some development trends, but we usually just say, okay, fine. Wind farms offshore, oh, right, fine, let's build them. If we can't do more coal, well, we still try to do a block, try to develop it. While if we started, or if we had started the offshore development 10 years ago, we would be in a much better situation today. The same goes for digital technologies. It is clear that we can't do this on purely voluntary basis, and we sometimes are too optimistic. The government is overly optimistic, announces something, and Mr. Henkel, who is representative of industry, is very right to note that it is not bureaucracy that generates it. We can't say that we will produce something, but we have to create incentives, stimuli for the development. If we really want to manufacture electrical cars, we have to equip gas stations in charging facilities. We have to look for partners to do that. From what Director Arak is saying, that our region is going to develop dynamically, 4.5%. Well, I would really like to ask this question, and it's my question of you, what are going to be the sources of this economic growth? Absolutely right. And we should also use it as a trend. We should use it for transformation. And it also takes political maturity of the society. Political maturity is also about us accepting something, us wanting to participate in something, which implies that we also have to accept the consequences. If we want to have free movement in Europe, and if we want to use single market, and if we want to use the recovery plan that we are talking about, we have to agree that over 30% will have to be devoted to climate-related objectives. And this is a decision we ourselves wouldn't make. We would make it differently. If it happened that conservative forces held majority, then de facto already in Europe we have the the ruling groups and the opposition. It is the mainstream that is in power. The opposition is conservatives, even of a traditional type. Those who used to be part of CDU, the Gaulle supporters in France, Italian parties, and ourselves. If these forces had the majority, then most probably the transformation evolution of the economy would be different. There would be different objectives then, probably. Less would be developed on energy and climate transformation at this pace. But still, we are part of this organization. And the number of votes we have there is as we can see. And to conclude, I would like to say that our British colleagues who were with us in European Conservatives and Reformers in the previous term of office, they were always very skeptical about the European funds. And one of our colleagues, I am still in contact with, and he's now in the Commons and Europe, he once went to our subcarpathian region, and he changed his opinion. He saw that the money was not wasted there. He saw that the money, well, of course, a part was not reasonably spent, but he, as a Brit, he was at that time quite skeptical about that, but he said that he could see it made sense, that those financial incentives, they made sense. So I would like it to be the result of the recovery plan at the end of the day. Just as the director said, to be able to draw benefits, the success would be greater. Now, if Mr. Arak can answer the question about the sources of growth, can you please do that? Or perhaps the director, Madam Director, can also help him to answer that? Professor, thank you very much for your question, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. I think that in short term, what is going to determine Polish economic growth consists in the exposure of Poland to international trade. The share of services and trade contributes to economic growth. And the consumption is overinflated, and it is caused by remuneration rise in Poland. Before the pandemic, the rise was much higher than in, for example, in Romania or in Bulgaria, where the growth was about 11 or 12%, but their baseline was lower than in Poland. And remuneration in Poland, on average, goes as high as the mean in Portugal in terms of the gross remuneration, and GDP per capita, according to the buying power parity, we are now ahead of Portugal, and it happened before the pandemic in 2019. That is why the consumption of the Polish middle class in a broad sense, as well as lower layers of our society, is that we were able to eliminate the material deprivation, the share of the society that for years had much lower income, and which resulted from that much lower consumption. They bought less and they spent less, and it also slowed down the economic growth. And now, today, the share of those people who are at risk of poverty or at risk of social exclusion in Poland is lower than in Sweden, which for years was considered to be the unmet model of welfare state. And well, in Poland, those indicators were done away with because of the redistribution programs which were introduced, as well as thanks to the dynamics of remunerations and economic growth. And in the subsequent years, those two factors will also play a role. In the pandemic, the internal consumption in Poland was also a factor which made well, Ireland, by the way, had the Facebook and Google transfers posted the added and general value in its territory, which apparently led to the fact that they didn't have any recession, according to the statistical office in Ireland. So then Poland, next to Lithuania, is a country that was able to defend its stance during the pandemic year of 2020, thanks to a significant internal market, thanks to consumption, but because of the fact that we used to be poor and we continue to be poor, we still are hungry. We buy more products, we buy cars, and quite soon, in the next 10 years, we are going to replace them with hybrid or electrical cars. We're also going to replace the fleet of buses in Poland. Poland is also a real power in terms of the production of electric buses and parts for it. Half of European exports of electrical buses comes from Poland. And it is one of those segments of the economy for the future that we have here. Most of electrical batteries to electrical cars produced in Europe come from Poland. And it also shows that it is the ability for us to adapt as well as move to different segments of the economy. It is a country that has a little greater problem with the adaptation will be the Czech Republic. And it is because the Czech Republic is smaller, and they are just the assembly house. They pick up parts from our region and they put them into the cars. They are just the assembly line. We produce parts, we are not the assembly line, and quite many people forget about it in public discourse. And we are simply going to replace parts we are producing. If we are now producing television sets, we are going to produce smart TVs. Poland delivers most of television sets to the European market. We deliver also chairs and furniture, but we don't have brands that can defend the manufacturing and that would increase added value. Well, if we were to choose furniture because it is made in Poland that had a company that with recognizable name, this is the consequence of the fact that our capitalism is young. It's been developing for 30 years only, and we still need the years for the development of some of the companies and transferring them to the future generation so that they were able to go out to other European markets. And then around 2015 that we entered that stage of economic development when part of Polish companies started to enter German market, and frequently they are met by illegal competition posed by the companies with significant state aid as well as protectionist mechanisms and other countries of Western Europe. But up to date, we developed in Poland. And I think that the companies could develop moving from one region to another. Now they have to go outside the country and not outside the region. An example of Inglot or Booksy in new technologies. It is a company which makes it possible to make appointments with specialists that we are now closing them down, like, hairdressers and other service providers in different parts of the world. And it also has its seat in Silicon Valley. And it is used by the Spanish government to make appointments with the officials of the Spanish administration. So there is some potential here, but certainly, these are not going to be companies that will be built on the basis of European funds. This is what I can agree, as Mr. Henkel is confirming. Well, as far as the state is concerned, we are able to do simple investments. And this is the success of the spendings in such regions as Subcarpathia, as well as the whole country and cohesion policies, because this is not complicated. We are able to redirect the spendings of the state to that. The development of complicated tools, the development of companies of higher competitiveness and innovation is not a domain of public sector. We have to spend much money to fund it. However, a chance of success is quite high and the risk of waste is huge. So the richer we are, the allocation of European money or the allocation of budget money to allocation would mean that 90% of those funds would be wasted. But it is also a risk which is taken by every investor who is involved in innovative undertakings. Well, but talking about it, Poland today is becoming a more and more attractive country from the perspective of the investment in venture capital in new technologies. The market today, in 2020, in the year of the pandemic, was able to go above 2 billion Polish zlotys. It is the market value, and this is 14 times more well, this is the market of venture capital transactions as compared with 2018.
Is there any public support for startups? Yes, there is. So there are a number of ventures from PFR, for instance. It's a public fund that invests into startups, but the transactions that are being done also take into account some funds from Silicon Valley, from the United States, or from other European countries. Poland used to be dead in terms of transactions in this area. Now we are becoming more and more attractive as a market from that point of view, and I'm sure this is going to be one of the areas that is going to lift us up, lift up the added value generated in the economy. We will be more than just cheap labor. So perhaps, you know, I sound optimistic, but I know, but we have to remember that Western Europe is going to be developing very slowly over time. It will be something like 1.5% of growth, and we will have above 3, 4. And we will still not be Asian tigers because we are much slower than that. Right, thank you so much. We are short on time. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I have some questions to our guests. If you still have just a couple of minutes for us, I would like to ask a question. If there is any sort of a broad discussion going on about how the money from the recovery fund should be best utilized, especially if is such discussion happening in Germany or in Italy. And my other question, I would like to start with Mr. Henkel. And the second question from one of our colleagues, Mr. Jarosław Szoda, also to Mr. Henkel. How do you see the possibility of Europe joining into the technological race where the US and China are ahead of us? Can we use that debt in order to effectively join the race? So please, over to Mr. Henkel and then Mr. Borci, if you could refer to the question. Thank you.
Czy pan Henkel nas słyszy?
Can Mr. Henkel hear
yes,
us?
Just seeing that my battery is short, I will try to answer the question before my screen is getting off. Well, there is not much discussion in Germany on what to do with the money for a couple of reasons. Number one, we are getting relatively little. I already said earlier that Germany, rightfully and because of its size, is being the country which pays the most and vouches for most of the credits in the future and gets rather little. We get, for instance, less than Italy. So there's not much discussion, number one. Number two, there is lots of criticism by some economists. You know, the corona crisis has one good thing. For the very first time in my economic and political life, I saw politicians listening to scientists. With the exception of Donald Trump, one could say that most countries in the world, most country leaders, followed the advice of the virologists, but they never followed the advice of the economists or the financial experts. You know, there the politicians always think they know it much better. And this is the same case here. So there are a lot of economists who say that the whole thing has the wrong directions and so on. And I mentioned the major reasons for it. So there is not much debate here in this country. But let me also say that, and since this is sort of the last time I probably come and will talk here, right? Is that so? I have an advice to the two MEPs in this discussion, to Professor Krasnodębski and our friend Mr. Borci. I think would be a very good idea if there would be some movement in the European Parliament asking the European Commission to make a study, or ask somebody else to make the study, a critical assessment of the real reasons for Britain leaving the European Union. I think this is absolutely necessary, because it is a disaster for the European Union. And I'm shocked and dismayed that nobody makes a scientific assessment of why they really left. And here is my advice for everybody who is participating in this, I think, very interesting debate, and with very capable and impressive participants. Go back to subsidiarity and avoid centralization. Number one, go back to a market-driven system and avoid state planning. Go back to the ideal and the motive and the goal of making Europe competitive. As you rightfully say, we need Europe to become and remain competitive against the others, but we aren't. Rather than always focusing on equality, which is always happening, and focus on expanding the European Union rather than deepening it. Quite frankly, I would rather have welcomed Georgia as a new member to the European Union this year than having left Britain and than having lost Britain. I think this should be the goal. So go back to the original ideas of the contract of Maastricht and stop all this stuff in direction of of the United States of Europe, which will automatically result in less competitiveness and less members.
Dziękuję serdecznie. To poproszę pana Borczy.
Thank you very much. And now over to Mr. Borka.
Sì, grazie. Dovendo provare a fare
Yes, thank you. If I wanted to summarize everything that I've heard, we heard, and rightly so, that Italy is going to be one of the major beneficiaries of the support mechanism, but it is just as true that we should differentiate between the amounts of money that are going to be paid in a non-refundable, that will constitute non-refundable support, and the loans. Talking about that last item, Italy will definitely be one of the countries that get more in loans proportionally than in a non-refundable money. So this is going to be the resources that will be included in the national public debt. So I would hope that these resources are well spent according to the logic of positive state spending, as Mario Draghi said, to paraphrase. Italy are the second largest manufacturer in Europe, and from my point of view, as such, we have to absolutely develop a national recovery plan. And we have to do it in such a way to really help our industry, our manufacturing sector. I think it's the matter of credibility of Italy as a country, not just in relation to the EU, but in relation to specific EU member states. I am thinking here about the spirit of collaboration that should bring our countries and our societies closer together. So we should have the spirit of cooperation based on friendship. And unfortunately, more often than not, that friendship is being sacrificed on the altar of bureaucracy, centralization, and central management from Brussels. The National Recovery Plan for Italy was developed by the previous government, headed by Giuseppe Conte. It was a coalition government bringing together the Five Star movement, a populist movement that back in 2018 won parliamentary elections in Italy, but it proved to be the type of a political movement that is fairly common in Europe, because it sort of stepped away from Nigel Farage closer to the socialists. So the previous government was the minority contributor to the Democratic Party, and that party belongs to the socialists in the European Parliament. So the previous government developed a plan. And well, we can argue about it because there are some doubts to it. I've already mentioned that as a country, we have to be stronger. And the first version of that plan, well, it did not raise too much enthusiasm. It was presented too late. There were gaps in it. Also, there were some proposals included that, to me personally, well, I don't think they are worthy. For instance, there was a plan to exchange laptops for all members of diplomacy in all consulate offices throughout the world. I respect diplomacy, but I think next generation has different goals than that. Of course, so there are some shortcomings. I said that before, but still, it should lead us towards some sort of a transformation. And now, on a more practical note, I worry that bureaucracy in Italy it's a class of its own. It's a state of being, really, the old bureaucracy. When it comes to its approach to digitization, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be cost associated and time that will be needed. And so the path in that direction, it really requires quite a lot of discussion. And that discussion is happening. Yesterday in the Italian Parliament, there was a discussion about competencies of specific commissions handling manufacturing, for instance, and the rights of the government when it comes to the development of the recovery plan. So I'm happy that my party submitted some of the remarks that were in fact adopted as regards energy sector, for instance. These are the topics where myself and Professor Krasnodębski, well, we handle these topics on a daily basis. So from that point of view, it will be necessary to have a very practical approach to energy, to the energy sector. That transformation will need investment and time. So I respect the principle of technological neutrality, but I think that what we need is for us to use our reason, our common sense, to take gas into account as a transitional technology. Of course, going towards full decarbonization, that much is clear. But we have to remember that every revolution that happens too quickly does not end well. Thank you. Thank you, and over to Director Schulz. Just a very quick summary. Yes, thank you. Just very shortly, I would like to refer to what Mr. Borgia said, because I also think that the Polish recovery plan should focus not on reinforcing and strengthening consumption, because that is high enough and we have supported it for long enough. the European market is also consuming and drawing in all sorts of products from us. But what we should do is focus on strengthening our manufacturing capabilities, or actually building new ones. This is a favorable moment for that, because the approach to climate, the attitude to climate has changed so much, and so certain technologies have been devalued. For instance, Germany is now departing from an internal combustion engine. They are introducing new technologies, and this is a good baseline for us, because all major Asian manufacturers of batteries located their factories in Poland. And this is, well, type of secondary development, but still we are manufacturing here in Poland, and we are learning, we are gaining know-how from those who offer key technologies. So that sort of development is something that we should be in favor of. But the negative side of things is what happened to Solaris, for instance. We're talking about an electric bus, the factory that manufactures electric buses in Poland that has a dominating position in the European market. It used to be a family-owned enterprise, and within our structures, we were not able to organize such takeover of the company that it would remain within the Polish ownership system. Perhaps some sort of a fund or organization could take part. And this is a very important type of industry, future-oriented, bringing together a number of subcontractors. So I think that obviously we need some bottom-up support, but I think the weakness of Polish transformation was lack of credit and loan market, failure to develop instruments that could potentially support Polish entrepreneurs, and not necessarily winning capital by losing property rights. So I think this is an important decision. The same goes for state support. Of course, investment is always associated with certain risk. And there is a number of programs for risk sharing. So risk sharing sometimes is important and possible from the point of view of the strategy. I think we still have a lot of concerns when it comes to losing funds. But if we don't take any risk, we will lose and waste certain opportunities. Sometimes we prefer to leave things to others because there is so much fear that something will go wrong in the future. I think we should really work on realizing that the manufacturing capabilities in Poland should be supported. And then we will take part in the technological transformation, not as consumers, but as co-creators of the new technological solutions. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Director. And now I think Mr. Henkel would like to speak again. So over to you, Mr. Henkel.
Just very shortly, last remark. I would like to come back to what Professor Krasnodębski said about Lewandowski, the Polish striker at Bayern Munich. I tell you, it's very, very simple. This example can be also used to describe the industrial relationship between Poland and Germany. Without Polish people in Germany, without its entrepreneurs, without its workers, without its engineers, Germany would not at all be where it is in the European Union. And it would be probably somewhere in the middle. And Bayern Munich would be nothing. If you take away the goals Lewandowski scored, Bayern Munich would be somewhere in the middle also. So we owe a lot to Poland. And I think this is one of the best examples of the European Union's value to the well-being of everybody in our on our continent.
Dziękuję bardzo za tą wypowiedź.
Thank you very much for this intervention. I don't see any more people trying to take the floor. So since we've exceeded our allotted time, I would like to thank everyone. I hope that we will have a chance to meet again. And we will have another interesting discussion. So thank you so much and hope to see you later. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to all the participants, to our audience, and I cordially invite you to take part in our debates to come. Thank you.
Grazie.